Welcome again, everybody. We are now going to follow up with last lesson's topic. Last time we have finished up pretty much theme development. It's a simple subject, although you could pretty much do everything what you do with modules, with themes. But theming itself, when we are just speaking about client side, the mostly client side part of theming is pretty simple. It's pretty simple, but you have to know from the Orchard side. We have started with module development, so we will now follow up with that. So let's open our Orchard solution. And again, our Dojo Course.sln, of course. And let's open our module where we left off last time. Okay, so here's our solution, and of course under Dojo modules we have our module. And where we were last time is our controller. So what we have done, we have first run the command line scaffolding for modules. We have created our first controller. We have also written our first view for our first controller. That's just opening up. It doesn't contain anything really useful, of course. What we have started with is dependency injection. So this was dependency injection last time. What we will do now, we will dive a bit deeper into Orchard services. We will use more services through dependency injection. So we really start developing for Orchard, not just pure MVC from now. So let's create for this purpose a separate controller, and let's call it dependency injection controller. So new class inside controllers, and let's call it dependency injection controller. By the way, it's not necessary that you suffix your controllers with the name controller. It's just a common naming convention. But again, since it's a controller, we have to derive from controller. And now we will write a constructor injection. We have seen in our first controller how iWork context accessor works, more or less. At least we have taken a look at how to fetch the site name. So actually let's start with that again, and let's see what else is in work context. But just so we have all the dependency injection related codes in our dependency injection controller, I will copy this part of the code here. And let's create an index method again. So here we have created our index, just for the sake of simplicity, of course. We will do the same now, and I'm removing this dependency injection related part from first controller. So our first controller is really simple, just for the first steps with our view and with the themed attribute. And back to our dependency injection controller. So let's create our index method, and let it just return a string, because first we will just look at it through the debugger. It makes more sense in this manner. So index, and this index will fetch the work context. So just say work context equals our work context, what we can fetch from through work context accessor with get context. So that's the same what we have done yesterday, and let this method return just the site name, so exactly what we have seen last time, and that's in current site name. And Again, it's an important little detail that since we have added a new class, a new file to the project, we have to save with Shift Control S everything, because otherwise Orchard wouldn't pick it up. Actually, it would pick it up because now we will start the site the first time today, but it's a good habit. So let's start the site with Ctrl F5 as we do it usually. And with the debugger, we will take a look at this work context object. So to really get a feeling what it contains. It's not necessary to know it in detail, or it's not necessary to learn it by heart. Just do know that if you need some global data, it's commonly inside the work context. So our site is still starting, and after so here is our site. Our module should be enabled because we enabled it last time. So following the naming convention, let's open up this index. So we should first use the name of our module, and secondly the name of our controller, so that's Dependency Injection. And since our index method is called index, it will open up by default. But strangely, it's not returning anything. So let's take a look at this in the debugger. So last time we have seen it, how to debug. You can either start with debugging by hitting F5, but it will be quite slow, and you don't need the debugger all the time. But now we need it, so let's attach it. Under debug, select attach to process, and we will attach the debugger to our IIS Express. So as we have seen earlier, we have this little IIS Express server running in the background and serving our website. So here is IIS Express, attach. Okay, and let's see what happens. Oh, by the way, there is something worth noting when debugging Orchard. Exceptions, inside Orchard are commonly swallowed somewhere, because there are many services. If an exception happens somewhere deep inside Orchard, it's not necessarily surfaced because it's not necessarily a critical error. But when you want to troubleshoot issues, it's a good thing to enable Visual Studio to show every thrown exception, so you know about everything. You know about every exception, even if it's not followed. And to get to that, we should open up with it's Ctrl D-E, the shortcut for it, the exception menu. I actually don't really know how to reach it the hard way. So, but you should tick here is CLR exceptions. So this will show everything we should know about. If anything happens, we will see the exception because the debugger will halt. So let's try to take a look at this again. And why is it not working? Probably it's output caching again, or not. Okay, I will check whether our module is enabled or not under the admin side, but it should be enabled. Let's log in with our beloved admin password. Actually, I will just let Firefox remember this password. interesting. You got it working? Or is it not opening for you either? Okay. Okay, so our module is not enabled. Apparently we missed last time's database somehow. But that's not an issue. So now we have the module enabled. Let's run it again. Okay, it outputs Dojo Course, so that's what we have expected. But let's take a look at that with the debugger again. So let's attach to iOS Express. Okay, and now I will reload the page. Alright, so here we are. Let's take a look at the work context on the big screen. Oops. Actually. Okay, so what's in the work context? There are many things. So do take your time to take a look at its content. First of all, we have some very general settings and configurations. Current culture, yeah, it's the current culture because Orchard is localizable, so NUS is the default setting, default configuration. We have data about the current site. So let's open it. Oops. What is, yeah, the current site. The current site contains the basic site settings. So as you can see, here are some properties, well, pretty self-explanatory. It's actually the same that you can set, almost the same that you can set under general settings. But one thing to note here, you see that this current site property contains, in reality, a site settings part object. So what is a site settings part object? It's okay, so it goes on a bit. It's a site settings part, okay, and what's its base? Why is it going all the time? Okay, I can't really show you what I wanted. Long story short, the site settings are contained in this site settings part. So since you know what content parts are, you know, of course, that this is a content part. So what this means, but I think we have mentioned this earlier, but now we see it in action. The site settings are content items as well, or actually every site configuration, every global site configuration is a single content item, and that single content item is made of the site content type. So there is a content type called site, and that content type has multiple parts attached, one of them being site settings part. So this means that if you want to add something to the site settings, you want to store your own settings for your own module, you just have to attach a part to the site content type, and it will be shown also on the admin screen. There is some plumbing needed for it, of course, but we will revisit this topic later. But for now, take into account or keep in mind that site settings are content items as well. So that's under current site. Of course, here's site name that we have printed. Also, there's current theme. So the currently active theme is also accessible from the work context here in Orchard. As you can see, our current theme is our own Dojo Course theme, but it also gives us the information that is derived from the theme machine. There are various other pieces of information about the current theme. By the way, you can dynamically change the theme. It's a bit more advanced topic, but Orchard is very extensible and really developer friendly. So even if you would like to change the theme given some arbitrary logic, like the user's preference, you can do it in runtime. There's also a current time zone property. well, yeah, it's self-explanatory. Is the site's time zone. You can set that dynamically as well. And there is a current user. So since Orchard has user management built in, and actually ASP.NET as well, there is also some very basic authentication service you can use through work context right away, and that's the current user property. So now we are logged in, so it contains our user. As you can see, since we have created it this way, it's admin. The super user, the original, the first user, we create the site with when doing the setup, doesn't have any email, so it's not filled. And if there is no user authenticated, this current user is just null. So you could easily check the authentication state by just checking current user to be null or not. And again, our user object is in reality a user part. So now you can probably guess that users are content items as well. And the basic user data is stored in user part that's attached to the user content type by default. But since this is user is just a content type, you can attach any parts to it, and you can extend user data with your own content parts. And finally, there's HTTP context. This is a bit more complicated, and it's also not Orchard related. This is something from ASP.NET, so you can see it anywhere when dealing with ASP.NET. What the HTTP context contains is pretty much everything you should know about the HTTP request that the client issued to the server, and also it contains data about the HTTP response that's currently built and that will be sent or is being sent to the client. So if you want to check what URL the user opened, it's here. So if we go down a bit, here is request. The request property inside HTTP context contains everything about the request. So you can see that here are the routes, the URL, URL data. For example, this is the URL the user opened the site. Well, here's the method. It was a GET request, of course, and many other data. So if you are dealing with the HTTP data for some reason, even with cookies, for example, it's in the HTTP context. And there's also the response. So in turn, this contains everything that you should know about the response. As you can see, here is the status code of status as well, with the status code. So you could do fancy things, simply like returning some kind of error code or some kind of success code other than 200 from your controller by setting the status. Actually, there are other even more simple ways, but you can set the response values through HTTP context quite simply. So that's about work context actually. And there is one final property that we can't expect right now, so I will just mention it, and it's this layout. So if you remember two occasions before, we have talked about shapes. We have used shape tracing when doing the theming. Now layout is kind of the root shape in Orchard. So the shape where pretty much everything begins is this layout. This is a shape in the same way that we have seen with shape tracing. It contains other shapes, and actually there's only one shape, not above it but rather around it, and that's the document. The document is the whole HTML document, but actually the document shape is just a wrapper around the layout shape. So long story short, Long story short, the layout is our root shape. You can push other shapes to it quite easily. We will see that in action in a few occasions from now, and it's accessible from the work context as well. So let's finish this up. Okay, so this was our work context. We could just stop debugging for now, and let's write something else. So we are using dependency injection. We will continue to see what's injectable, other default very important OChat services. So let's take a look at that. First of all, we have seen that the HTTP context is included in the work context. But if you don't need anything else but the HTTP context from the work context, it's good practice to just inject that one. And for that we have naturally an HTTP context accessor. So it's called HTTP context accessor. It's quite a long name. We also need a new namespace for that. We could abbreviate it as HCA, and you can inject it, of course, in the same way as the work context accessor. It's quite similarly used as well. So just to demonstrate it, if you need the HTTP context, then you should just call the current method on the HTTP context accessor. Now, since we have injected the work context accessor before, we have some redundancy here. So this is not something you would do exactly like this in a production environment, of course. This is just to demonstrate that if you only need the HTTP context, you can also inject just the HTTP context. Now, why is it important? The reason we are doing dependency injection in the first place is not just because it's convenient, it's nice, the structure is nice, there's loose coupling, whatever, but also it makes our code testable. So in an ideal world, we have all our external dependencies visible by, for example, injecting them through our constructor. Now, this also means that if we are writing tests for our code, unit tests, most possibly, or most of the time, then we should give our class, our implementations for these interfaces. Now, this means that if you are writing tests, you should provide your class an iWork context accessor and an iHTTP context accessor, and giving your class such implementations, it can be quite tedious. There are mock frameworks, of course, but sometimes you just have to write an implementation solely for testing for these interfaces. Now this means that the less dependencies you have, the testing will be easier. So if you don't need the whole work context, just the HTTP context, it's good practice to inject just the HTTP context. So when you are testing, it's easier. And it's also a bit nicer. We could format our constructor like this, since we will have some more dependencies here. And so let's dive a bit even deeper, and let's take a look at the notifier. It's something quite cool. So let's start with that. It's probably not the most important service, but it's cool, and and it will take us to important aspects. So it's called iNotifier, and as you may guess, this is for showing notifications to the user. So let's store it in a notifier reference. We need to inject it. So again, just a notifier, and let's store it from the injected reference in our field. Okay, so what should we do to notify the user? Let's take a look at the notifier that it provides us. And it provides a few methods, namely there's add. Well, this is the generic method to display notifications, but there are extension methods. Those do serve as kind of shortcuts, so it's better to use them, namely error, information, and warning. So what these await are just localized strings. So if I want to display an information message to the user, I should feed this information method a localized string. Now, what is a localized string? If you remember, when we have done the theming part. Sorry about that. I wanted to click collapse all. So when we have done theming in our Dojo Course theme, in one of our views here in branding, we use this T string. And we told you that this T string is for localization, and basically every time you display a string to the user, you should use this T string. Now, if we take a look at this T strings implementation, you will see that it returns a localizer delegate. It's a localizer delegate, and what this localizer delegate does, well, it defines a method that returns a localized string object. So what we need now is something related. We need a T string, but now we are in a controller, so it will be a bit different. Because if I try to do the same, just as in the view, and I try to write T, there is no T, so we have to do something about this. And what we do is we inject. Again, it's dependency injection, but not through the constructor now. We will inject a localizer, and how we do it is that we should define a property, a public property. It should be of type localizer. So this is the delegate we have seen previously, and let's call the property T. So if I escape the snippet editor and import the namespace for this localizer, we will now have a T. So I've said that this is dependency injection too. Indeed it is, but it is called not constructor injection, what we have here, but this is property injection. Basically, you don't have to bother with this. The important aspect to know here is that this T property will be filled from the outside with a localizer implementation. We don't have to bother about that. And again, it's good for testing because from the outside you can change the implementation. There is a small good practice to follow, and this is the usage of a null localizer. So what we commonly do in the constructor is that we take an instance, a localizer instance from this null localizer static class. This is something very simple. If you take a look at instances value, we will see that basically this property contains just a delegate for returning a new localized string object. This null localizer solely serves for not having new reference exceptions, because if you would access this T property too soon, well, even from the constructor, although that would be best practice to do that, now it won't give a null reference exception because we have something in that T. It's a good practice to pre-fill it like this, but it will be injected from the outside with some actual localizer. So that now that we have our T method, we can fill the information with some text. And you see that again, about what we have seen in our view, this T accepts a string, and also it expects. Okay, I will do it again. And also it accepts a parameter of objects, and these objects are basically such string format arguments. So let's see what this means. We could say something like hello here again, and that's it. But what if we want to include something in the localized string? Like we want to include the user's name. We know that it's in the work context, so let's get the user's name from there. I will now refactor this part a bit, because we want the current user. Since we want to display this notification only if there's a user, so let's wrap this with Ctrl KS inside an if. Let the expression be that our user is there. We don't have a null user. Our user is actually authenticated. Okay. And now we want to greet the user with hello username. So what we could do is like this. We could concatenate the message with the username. So that would be current user dot username. But what is the issue with this implementation? The issue is that this is a localized string. So you could go there and create a localization package and define that this hello space should be something else, for example in Hungarian. So in Hungarian this should be like servus space. Okay, but the issue here now is that in other languages the word order is not necessarily the same. So in other languages, for example, you may want to have the user's name at the beginning. So username, greeting, or something like this. This means that this implementation what we have here is not an optimal one, and that's what that params argument overcomes and the usage of that. And how we do that is the following. It will be the string.format syntax. We should have a reference here, like this. Now, what this strange parenthesis 0 means, that this will be the first argument from the params list, or params collection. So if we use the second argument of this t, as you can see now we have the params field with our username. There is only one parameter, this one here. So since this is the first, this is the 0th, since we are indexing from 0, i.e. we should access the parameter 0. So this will display hello username for us, but in a localization package you could translate this hello 0 to 0 hello if you need a different word order, and it will work. So if you want to inject external data into T strings, do it like this. Okay, and now this won't really be enough, because yeah, here we don't have a theme around our action, since it is just returning a string. But to display our notifications, we need the theming engine around our actions results. So what we will do is very simple, but again something you should know, because it's quite commonly used. It's a quite commonly used technique, and what we will do is we will redirect the user. So once the user hits this index action, we will redirect the user. Oops, let's get back to our module. We will redirect the user to our first controller's index method, index action. So let's remove this site name display from here, and let's return a redirect to action. As you can see, there are many redirect type return values here, but let's use redirect to action now. Oops. The action name, so all such routing related methods follow a common pattern. If it's called something action, this is redirect to action, and these methods accept an action name as the first parameter, and then controller name, and then route values from then on. So let's try everything here. So the first parameter is action name, well, that's index. Oops. Now if I would just leave it here, that would mean redirect to the index action of the current controller. So it would redirect to itself. Now that's of course quite bad. So the second parameter could be route values or a controller name. Let's use the controller name, so that's first. And from then on we can again specify route values. Now what is this route values? By the way, what I'm explaining now is not just for Orchard. This is generally ASP.NET MVC, but this is so common that you should know about it right now. And so the route values, as you can see, it should be an object. So MVC helpers and such routing methods especially make heavy use of anonymous objects. So route values could be anonymous objects as well. This is the simple way to do it. Oops. It's just an anonymous object, and now we should fill this anonymous object with some properties that are named after naming conventions. So we have mentioned naming conventions and how there are places where there are other naming conventions instead of configuration options inside Orchard. Well, this is true for MVC as well, ASP.NET MVC as well. So now we route it to the index section of our first controller, and this would just work. So we don't need this third parameter here. I'm just demonstrating it. If we would need that, if we would redirect to a controller of another module, because this means that redirect to the index section of the first controller in this module. But if we want to redirect some other module, we should specify the module name. And how we do that is that we specify an area. And this has to do with ASP.NET MVC, because Orchard modules are basically a thing called areas from MVC. If you are interested, just Google it, but you have to keep in mind here that you should write area and then the module name. So let's demonstrate it with our module, and that's Dojo Course.module, and that's what our route values object should contain. But again, this here is redundant, but you get the pattern. Okay, we have an issue here, and the issue is that this action returns a redirect to route result object, but here we are returning a string. So to quickly overcome it, we could return an action result. The type action result is basically the root type of every result type in MVC. So despite this redirect to action returning a redirect to route result, in its heart it's an action result. So when in doubt, return action result. So that's it. Let's try it now. Let's go here, and I'm refreshing the page. What we should see is that we should be redirected to our first action we have written last time. Dynamic compilation is now kicking in, and we have been redirected. We see our beautiful green background, and on this beautiful green background there is an even more beautiful green notification area with hello admin. Wow. And we are being greeted 2 times. That's just 2 kinds from this side. So notifications work, and this is how notifications work. Actually, one final note about notifications. Notifications are a bit persistent. This means that if you set a notification and you redirect the user, they will be shown on the next page view. Because you know this is a request, this runs in, and then there's a redirect, then there's the next request, and still this notification is living through these requests. This is using a thing called temp data. This is a notion from MVC. If you are interested, Google that too. And one final thing about routing and MVC is another usage of this this object here. It will be easy. Is to pass around get parameters. So our first controller could expect some parameter like I don't know. Let it be some string, and the string should be, for example, user name. So for some reason we may want to access the username from this action. So arguments in actions are parameters. So this pretty much corresponds to a route parameter like this. And here we have to write something. So if I open this, if I would open this, I'm just not trying now because we try it from code. This username argument would be filled here. But we want to fill that from a redirect. And here comes our anonym object handy again. Because anonym objects can contain any route data, not just the area name. So you could specify username here. Oops. And let it be the current user's name. Well, yeah, here I'm not checking against no, so forgive me that, but you get the point. So let's see what happens. I will just check this from the debugger. It's not worth outputting it somehow. So let's take a look at our dependency injection action again. It should redirect us again after something. Yeah, and as you can see, we have been redirected to this route with the parameter, with the username parameter. And if I attach the debugger here, we should be able to see the username correctly filled, and indeed it is. So great, we can now pass get parameters around. This is the way to do it in MVC. This is again something not closely related to Orchard. This is the same with standard ASP.NET MVC project as well. And let's see a second kind of a special dependency, because Work Context Accessor, HTTP Context Accessor, Notifier, these are standard dependencies, standard services, nothing special, just injected through constructor. Localizer is somewhat special because it's first it's just a delegate, and second it's property injected. So we will see another kind of a special dependency, and that's for logging, because we may want to log something. We may not want to show a detailed error message, for example, to our users, but we may want to log it. so our administrators can take a look at it. For this, we should use property injection again. So let's define a public property, and its type should be iLogger. And let's name it logger. We should import a orchel.logging namespace for this to work. This pattern with the t-string follows, it's good practice to fill it from a null logger this time. Oops. It works the same way. We use it because of the same reason. So what do we want to do? We may want to log something here, like when we notify the user, let's log the let's log it that the user was notified. Okay, so let's call what's in logger, and with logger we have quite the same pattern with notifier, because we have a generic log method that has many arguments, but we have much shorter extensions for logging informational, fatal, or error messages, or even debug messages. We will now use error because it will show up in the log file even if we don't have a very verbose log level setup, but by default like this. As you can see, it has 2 overrides, or 4 overrides rather, but what it expects is a message. It can also contain some exception, and again it can use this string format kind of parameterized way for formatting the string. So nothing really special. We won't log an exception now, but just a message. Like, or that's kind of silly to do it here. Let's do it in an else, because it's quite. This is an error condition if the user is not logged in. Of course, we haven't heard of the user not being logged in. So let's log an error when the user is not logged in, like user was not logged in. Okay. And to make it a bit more right, I will do the redirection in the same manner. So just a bit of refactoring. So since we have this null check here, let's redirect the user only with the username if there's a user indeed, and let's redirect without the username if there's no user, like this. Now what will happen if the user is logged in? We will redirect it, and the notification will be displayed. If the user is not logged in, we will log an error message, and we will redirect it to the same action, but without the username argument, the username parameter. Now, what this means, by the way, and this is again something generic ASP.NET MVC, that in our first controller, it's now advised to check the validity of this username. Because now, since we won't use it here, won't use it in this else clause, this will be null here. So not just don't use this username string like it is set all the time, because it can happen that it isn't set. Okay, so let's try it. First I'm opening it up again, just with the logged in user. By the way, you may have noticed that I have attached the debugger repeatedly. Particularly what I do is that when I change the code and restart the site, before that I de-attach the debugger. The reason is that if dynamic compilation should run when the debugger is attached, so that means that the debugger is attached while I'm reloading a page after changing the C# code, it will be slower. And there's really no use to it unless you are debugging something with dynamic compilation, of course. Okay, so let's try signing out now and see what happens. Yeah, nothing here. But let's open up our dependency injection action again. And we can see that correctly we have been redirected to our first action and no argument. Okay, but there should be a log message somewhere. Now, where is it? Let's take a look at our solution folder now. Convenient way to open up the solution folder is to right-click somewhere on some project and open folder in File Explorer. So I click now the web project because it's almost at the log files. So this is our orchard.web projects folder, and we have the logs inside app data and logs. We have 2 log files here. It was quite recently modified, so this should be our log message. And indeed, wow, this is our first log message. We have something. So as you can see, here's our message, and everything else was added to the log message by the logger, like the time, like the exact time of the when the logging happened, and also the namespace of where the logger was called. So basically that's it. If you have any issues with your orchard site and you don't really know what the issue can be, it's a good first step if you don't have ideas how to solve the problem to take a look at the log files, because the log files most possibly contain at least some clue what the error could be. Okay, so we have seen now how dependency injection works. What we follow up now is data storage, how to store data, because until now we have just done light user interactions, but we haven't persisted anything, we haven't saved anything, and that's what we will do now with records. So we will use the database. Later we will take a look at how to create files also, by the way, but we will now see how to use records.
Okay, so let us continue. So as Zoltán said, we are going to continue the course with data storage. So as it was mentioned, we were interacting with the user lightly until now. Now we're going to learn about how to store data in the database actually. So we are going to do some little more juicier stuff. So basically the data storage in Orchard has 2 ways. One of them is just storing records in the database, the other is with content parts. We're going to look at content part development later on. So, you know, those little units that we have seen earlier, for example, body part and things like that, we're going to create those. And of course, body part stores some text. We're going to use parts to store other data. First, we're going to look at how to store just records in the database, and the way to do it is basically we need to create a class. So this class is going to represent the data we are storing, and the reason that is it a class because between the database and Orchard there is a layer that is called an hibernate. This is an object relational mapping system that is going to map the database data into real-world objects. So the first step to store data in a database is by creating a record class. So let's do that now. And the way to do it is if you go to our module in the models folder, let's create a new class. Let's call it person record. So we're going to go with an easy example here. Which is a very usual example and demonstration, but it's going to show you how to store data in Orchard very easily. So let's just create a class called personRecord.cs. Now, this person record is going to store some data through some properties. Now, a very interesting and very important detail here is that the class needs to be public, of course, but that's the default. But every property you store needs to be virtual. And this is because NHibernate needs them to be virtual, so there's nothing very special here. That's because NHibernate. So the properties you store need to be virtual. Now, since we are writing data into a relational database, and our records are identified by an ID, which is an integer, an auto-increment integer, we're going to need to store a property that is this actual ID. So way to do it is we're of course using the prop snippet, and our integer property is just going to be ID. And of course, since NHibernate needs it needs to be virtual, of course. So that's our little property here. Now, for a person, you may want to store other data. For example, the person's name. So let's store it as well. It's a virtual integer, and let's call it name. And the other one is, for example, we can store, of course, not only integers in the database and not only strings. We can store more complicated data, but you need to be careful. For example, what's nullable and what is not nullable and things like that. You need to you may want to store, for example, enums in the database, but they should be stored in the database actually as strings. But we are going to look at it now. But if you want to create an enum, for example, to store whether this person is a male or a female, you can do that too. So let's just create an enum here and give it two values. So public enum sex is male and female, with male and female values. And of course, we need to store this as a property on our record class. So let's do that. Virtual property, and the type is this enum, and the property name is sex. And now we're going to store the person's birthday. Now, what you need to know about storing dates in the database, that they should be nullable. So if you don't have a default value, it's going to just return a default date. And the usual format you may want to store your dates are UTC. So that's a very common format, and basically .NET manages this very well. So if you store every date in the database in UTC format, you won't have any problems with using this in different environments. So let's store the birthday as well. So it's a virtual date time, and the property name is birth date UTC. So as you can see, I'm sort of implying the format in the property name to make it clear that this is a UTC format date. And last but not least, we're going to store a short biography about this person. And now we're going to use a special attribute that is needed to store data with many characters. So by default, I think if you just create a string and store it in the database, it's going to have a limit of 2,000 characters, but you can expand it to more. So if we create our next property, it should be virtual string and biography. Okay, and the attribute we're going to add to this property is called string length max. And as you can see, this attribute resides in the orchard, the data, the conventions namespace. So let's save it. Okay, and a little customization here is we're going to create a constructor with the ctor snippet, and we're going to set the biography with a default value. So biography equals, I don't know, no bio written yet. Okay, so if the user doesn't enter any data, here is going to be this default value. Okay. So we have a record class. So this is the actual data structure that I can manage in my Orchard module, and I'm going to give instructions to Orchard and then hibernate. What to do with these properties, how to store them in the database, and then Orchard and then hibernate will basically handle the rest. So these hibernate will do the job for me and persist the data in the database if I tell it to. So I have the record class, and I'm going to close this. So I have the record class. The next step we're going to need is a migration. So migration is basically a set of instructions to tell Orchard what kind of tables and what kind of columns to create in the database, and I can sort of map these properties I have in the record into real columns in the database, and that's how I store data in the database. So the way to do it is I'm going to set the scope here. So the way to do it is you add the class to the project root. So what I just showed here is very useful if you write a module and it has a lot of directories and files. So as you can see, in a very simple Orchard installation, if you don't count our theme and module, there are 73 projects plus our module and theme. But let's imagine you have a lot more, and these modules are a lot more complicated, and you have a lot of files and folders. The way to basically narrow the scope of what you see in the Solution Explorer is to use the scope to this. It's very useful if you want to work on only one project at a time, and then you can step back and forth and to change the view of the Solution Explorer. So the next thing we will do is adding another class to our project. This class is going to be a so-called migration. If you have only one migration, you can place it in the project root, but it's generally a best practice if you have multiple files of the same kind. For example, you have multiple migrations, you have multiple resource manifests, or, well, what does it be? It could be routes, for example, or admin menu declarations. We're going to look at it later. You may want to create a specific folder for those files and put it there. But if you have only one of those files, for example, we have only one migration in this module yet, we're just going to place it in the root. So the next thing is the next step is to create the migration and the migration class, and we're just going to name it migration.cs. Of course, if you have multiple migrations, you may want to give it a meaningful name. For example, content migrations, I don't know, whatever migrations and things like that. So the way to do it is migration classes should derive from a class, a specific class that is called data migration IMPL. So this is basically a base class that resides in the orchard.data.migration namespace that gives you the necessary functionalities to talk to and hibernate and the database. So let's just include this using. And the way we write migrations is that, first of all, we need to keep track of what we are doing at the moment, what we are doing with our database as time goes on. So the first step to create a table for our module in the database is by declaring a create method. So let's just do that, and I'll explain later why is that. And this method returns an integer. So basically, just storing an integer is the way to keep track where is the state of the database related to the state of your code. So if you develop your module on and on, you may want to make changes to these migrations, and we're going to see how you can make these changes. And the way to keep track of where's the database with these changes related to your code is by telling it a number. So it can be, for example, 1, 2, 3, whatever. These are stored in a special table in the database that is called Data Migration Record. I think the full name is Orchard Framework Data Migration Record, but the Data Migration Record part is definitely in there. And Data Migration Record basically stores a lot of records. They have an ID, they have the name of the feature and the migration, so the feature is the feature that holds this migration class, and then it has a number. So this table stores what are the versions of these different migrations. If you create a new migration class and it has a create method, the default value you want to return is 1. So basically this is version 1 of this migration class. Now, what we're going to do is tell Orchard what to do with our record class and what kind of columns it should store in the database. And the way to do it is to use the Schema Builder object, which comes from the base class of this migration. So if you start to type scheme.sch, you're going to see that the Schema Builder pops up. And it has a lot of, well, not too much, but it has a few methods. And well, no surprise, if you want to create a table in the database, you're going to need to use the create table method. So no surprise here, really. The first parameter it accepts is a name of the table. So it's going to be prefixed with the name of the feature that this migration class is residing in. So the name should be the name of the record class, to make it clear. And the way to achieve this, so as you can see, it accepts a string. So I can type, for example, person record here. And then I'm going to do other stuff, but that's a bit ahead. But let's say I'm going to change the name of the person record class. Well, it's not necessarily a good idea because it could break things if you're deploying, if you're updating this module on an older instance. But let's say I would like to change the name of the class. So that's why you should use the type of keyword. So if you type type of person record, and if you hit Ctrl dot, the little pop-up will help you by adding the using Dojo Course.module.models. And if you close the parentheses and type name, it is going to give back the actual name of the class. So anytime you update the name of the class, it's going to be reflected here as well. So you don't need to, if you use type of class name dot name structure, you don't need to worry about updating the class names. In anywhere in the code is going to be automatically updated by Visual Studio if you use the Ctrl dot and rename class when renaming the class. Okay, so what is this other strange thing here, which is the second parameter? We're going to use a lambda, which will allow us to make modifications, sort of make modifications on the table. So to follow the trail, we're going to use table. We're going to pass the parameter table because that's what we are going to mess with. And if you hit a dot, you're going to see what kind of methods and properties are available here. So let's see what we have here. Basically, the first step to create a table in the database is by adding columns to it to tell Orchard and then Hibernate what kinds of properties I want to store. So if I use the column with the generic because I want to tell what kind of data this is, we're going to see at the enum why is this important. So we have the column property here. The first property we need to add to the table is the ID. So if you start typing in the properties, it should be just ID. And then we are going to use another lambda inside of this one to basically define the properties of this specific column. And to make it clear, well, it's not a convention, but I usually type table and then type column. And for example, when I'm editing content parts, I type part and things like that to make sure to make it clear when I look at the code that okay, I'm now editing a table, I'm editing now a column and a part and things like that. So that's why I name the parameter to column, because I'm editing a column. So the methods I'm going to call here, first of all, is the primary key, because that's how I tell it that okay, I have this ID property here, this should be the primary key. Why is that? Because Orchard will handle the rest for me, and the records in this table are going to be identified by this very property. Okay, and by calling the method identity here is what we need. So basically, this is the primary key, and then it's going to identify the records. And I can close this and go on to the next one. Okay, so the next one, and you may notice that I will going to leave one property out for a specific reason. We're going to see why is that. So the next thing is we're going to store the next property. So we have a few here. Let's go on with the next one. Oh, and okay, I just noticed that I defined the name property as an integer, so it should be a string. Sorry. Make sure you make it right. Okay, so the next one it should be a string, and now I'm going to leave out the name. Why is that? We'll see in a few minutes, and go on with the next property, which store the sex of this person, and we don't have any options here that we need to apply. But you may notice that hey, I have actually an enum object, but I'm storing it as a string. Well, this is the best practice because, of course, nhibernate doesn't know anything about your specific enumeration object. So it's going to be stored as a string because this is the safest way to make sure you can identify these values. Okay. So let's go on with these properties. I'm just going to quickly type them because we only have a few minutes left. So the next property is the birth date UTC, and it can be a datetime. So the datetime object is a very common thing. So we can store it like a datetime in a database, but of course it will be like a string. So let's call it birth date UTC, and I don't think I expressed this enough, but the properties, so the column names should be the same as the property values. So it's a must. They must be the same. They must be named the same as the properties. So the birth date UTC doesn't need any customization here, and then we're going to store the biography, and this is also a string. It's called biography, and we're going to make an addition here. So basically, to make sure that it is possible on the database side that this column can hold a string with a very big length. So not just on the server side, but we need to make sure that the database also knows about that. Hey, I have a string here, and I want to make it as long as possible if I want to. So we need to call a sort of unlimited, so-called unlimited method here to make sure that the database knows about this, and I can enter some data. This can cause you troubles and give you, well, a not meaningful error if you don't use this and you want to store data that is longer than the default value, than the default length. And the next thing we are going to do here is, if we close these parentheses, and to make sure that I can express it where this ends, we're going to well, let's just tab it a little bit more. Okay. Okay, so some code cleanup. So what we're going to do next is tell the database system what should be the property that I want to index by these values, because most probably I want to search a person by its name. It's possible that it can have the same value for different persons, but obviously I don't want to search it by its ID because I don't know it. But if I want to find some person, I may want to find it by its name. So let's create an index, and the way to do it is you can do it in the create table, but you can do it in another method, and that is called alter table. I have capitals on, so alter table, and this works in a very similar way. We're going to need to pass it the name of the table, which is generated with the name of the record class. So type of, I'm not good with typing at this moment, sorry. So type of person record dot name, and then we have a very similar structure here. We're going to call a method on this table, and this is called, very surprisingly, if I want to create an index, that is called create index. So most of the time, if you want to find something in the Orchard API, you just have to think about, well, how would I name it if I were to write such a feature, and most probably it's going to be the same name in the system. So create index, and I think I have lost IntelliSense here for some reason. Okay, so anyway, the first parameter that I should pass this method is the name of the index. So I can, if I have multiple indexes on the same table, I need to somehow distinguish them. So, but I don't have too much properties here. So let's just call it name. But as you can see, I forgot to add a property here. So this should have been the second part of this demonstration. Anyway, I'm going to add this column right now, and I'm going to explain the updates later on. So let's just call it name, and it should be customized a little bit. So obviously, if I'm not an actor in a Brazilian soap opera, I don't have too long name. But let's say this name can be, for example, 100 characters long. So column.width length will allow me to specify what is the maximum width of this string. So the name of the index should be just name, because I don't have too much properties and then too much indexes I have to distinguish. And the second parameter is a string array object that will be the actual columns that should be indexed. And the only property that I need here is name. And if I close it, most probably, no, I need another one here. Okay, so I was missing a closing parenthesis here. So I have my immigration here. Basically, if I run it, the process, what is going to happen here is that Orchard we're going to detect that I have a migration class. So I think I can access the database very quickly here. No, I didn't want SQL Server. So if I view Server Explorer, we're going to open a connection to the database. So the only thing I need to do is SQL Server compact. it's a bit of different UI. Okay, so if you open the Server Explorer and then connect the database, you select SQL Server Compact 4.0. This is because we have a SQL Server database in this instance, and you hit continue, and then you just browse the database. And I hope I'll be able to find it. Yes, so the database resides in the src orchard.web, appdata, sites, default, and orchard.sdf. So I just open this database. I don't need a password here. I just hit OK. So if you open it and go to tables, let's say we're looking for just a second, Orchard framework data migration record. So let's see show table data, and please note that this migration didn't run yet because I didn't run my module. So the data migration class, as you can see, there's a list here about the data migrations, and the version I was talking about earlier, which is 1 in our case, is stored here. So I have this migration class here. So if I run if I refresh on my site, Orchard is going to detect, well, first of all, dynamic compilation will kick in because the file system watcher actually noticed that it has a new file. So I saved everything. Make sure you save the project as well because the CS project changed. So we have a new migration class. It is going to be detected. The migration will run, and if my module is enabled, and that is of course enabled, so I don't need to log in, this migration will run, create a new entry in the data migration record, and the return value is going to be 1. So I think I can just maybe refresh here. No. Okay, what did I miss? Okay, let's just check. Now this is strange. So if I go to modules, okay, one thing I may have not done correctly is to save all, because if you don't save the project as well, it won't be included in the CS proj file. The migration class won't be detected, and then dynamic compilation won't work. But just in case, I'm going to rebuild the solution. So basically, the data migration record should reflect this change, but we're a bit over time here. So this is how we create a migration class and tell Orchard how to store these properties in the database. We're going to go ahead and look at the migrations, how to improve them and change them over time, what is the best practice about it, and then other stuff about storing data with content paths, for example. So see you next time.